Hello everybody, welcome to the DSLR Workshop, the show teaching you how to maximize the power of your digital SLR camera. I'm your host, Steven Zeller, and today on our second episode, we're going to talk about a few things we covered last episode. We're also going to talk about some new techniques that will help you improve the quality of the photographs that you're taking with your digital SLR and even your point and shoot camera. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, last week we talked about the different camera modes and the mode dial switch, right? So I talked a lot about the shutter priority mode and how you could use that to not only take fast action shots by freezing action, but also to slow your shutter speed down and take shots like the waterfall that I mentioned where you get that smooth, silky water effect, right? Well, the other thing that I want to cover is aperture priority mode. Okay, aperture priority mode, you're primarily going to use that for everyday photographs, for portraiture, something where you want to control depth of field. Okay, and we're going to give you a couple of examples. Again, to remind you, a small aperture number or a small f-stop, meaning f2.8 or f4, equals a wide aperture. And a large number like f22 equals a small aperture. And again, those smaller apertures give you a greater depth of field. In other words, a greater amount of your photo from front to back is in focus, as opposed to a shallow depth of field, which you get with a small f-stop or a large aperture. Okay, so I'll show you a couple examples. In this first photo, you'll see where I'm using a very shallow depth of field. You'll see that the foreground is in focus, my subject is in focus, and the background's out of focus. And that's why you would want to use a small apertures to get you that very shallow depth of field. It's great for portraits because it allows you to focus most of the attention on your subject and not distracting elements that are in the background. Now with a photo that's very deep in depth of field and has a very great depth of field, like a landscape photo that you'll see here, this allows you to keep everything in focus, your foreground and your background, so that you don't lose some of those elements out of focus. So for portraiture and stuff, we primarily want to use smaller apertures that allow us to keep our subject in focus and our background out of focus. And for landscapes, we use a wider depth of field. Now, your aperture sometimes is going to be dictated by the amount of light, especially if you're using flash, be it on-camera or off-camera flash. And we'll cover more on that later and we'll go deeper into that subject. But I just wanted to touch on that so you have a better idea of how you can use aperture priority mode to make better photographs. All right, the next thing I want to cover today is I want to cover grip and posture. Okay, it's very important when you're taking photographs all day long. You're going to be out shooting. Say you're shooting a wedding for a friend, or you're taking portraits of your kids, baseball team, or even just pictures at a sporting event or something like that, or a birthday party. What you don't want to do is you don't want to wear yourself out. So in order to do that, there's some things that you do to help give yourself a better posture, okay? For one, when you grip the camera, now I'm right-handed, and all cameras are set up that way for the most part. There are some left-handed cameras, but most of them are right-handed. And I grab my camera with my right hand, and then I support underneath it with my left hand. Now this camera has the battery grip on it, so I've got a little bit more stable support, especially if I want to shoot in vertical mode. But what I'll do is I'll support my camera with my left hand, take my picture with my right, so all my camera support's pretty much resting right on my left hand. Okay, and so when I set up my camera, I've got my hand underneath here so I can adjust my zoom, so I can zoom in and out, and I can also do focus if I'm manually focusing. All right, so I've got that. I see a lot of people who do this, the overhanded C grip, and this is okay, but it doesn't allow you to support the weight of your camera with that left hand. With my left hand under here, I can keep my elbow in close to my body, which gives me support of my body for holding the weight of the camera, and I'm not putting it all on my arms, okay? So when I go to take a shot, I bring the camera up to my eye, and I don't bring my eye to the camera because, again, this gets you leaned over and gets you in kind of an off-balance, bad posture. I bring the camera up to my eye, and I focus on my shot, and I take the shot. Very simple, and it's also very effective. And like I said before, it gives you the opportunity to support your camera and not wear yourself out all day. If you're constantly doing this all day long and you got this thing going on, by the end of the day, you're going to be completely worn out. So keep that in mind. And old habits die hard. I understand that completely. So it may take some time for you to get to using a new method, but I guarantee you that in the long run, it'll pay off. All right, so that's our subject on grip. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about ISO. We talked about it briefly in the first episode as ISO being one of those things that affects your exposure. But say you're in a dark room and you want to take a photo without flash, but you only have so much aperture. depending on the speed of your lens or the maximum aperture of your lens. So in order to be able to do that, you can increase your ISO. So most cameras, like the Nikons, they start out at ISO 200. The Canons are at ISO 100. And for every time you double that ISO, you're increasing your light sensitivity by one stop of light. So if I start at ISO 200 and I go to ISO 400, now I have one extra stop of light that I can work with. Now the disadvantage to this is you're going to get some noise and some grain in your photos, especially when you get up in the higher ISO ranges like ISO 1600, which most of the cameras today are capable of handling pretty well. Some of the older cameras from 5 years ago, you get up around ISO 1600 and most of your photos aren't going to be usable without using some sort of noise reduction software. So keep that in mind, but it's another way that you can help improve the quality of your photos and without having to use flash. All right, now speaking of flash, we're going to start moving into the use of flash. And one of the things I want to talk about is pop-up on-camera flash. Okay, this is using your little pop-up flash on camera. Now, if you don't have an external flash and this is all you have, that's fine. But for the most part, I prefer to use this only as a weapon. Okay, on-camera flash is very harsh, it's very unflattering and flat, and it's a very small light source. As you can see, it's really, really teeny tiny. So when you take a small light source, it's very harsh. The further away you move from your subject, the worse it's going to be. So keep that in mind, but you can use on-camera flash, and there's a number of different products available that will go over this flash and cover it to make it a little bit softer, a little more diffused, make it a more pleasing light as opposed to a small harsh light source that you get right here. And when it comes to light, remember that the smaller your light source, the harder the light's going to be. So the bigger your light source, the softer, the more pleasing the light will be. If you take light from a north-facing window, which is indirect sunlight, it's very soft, very pleasing, and it's a nice big source as opposed to something like this. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, well, that about covers it for our episode for this week. I hope you'll join us next week and appreciate you tuning in. Remember that you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/the DSLR Workshop. You can find us on our website at www.thedslrworkshop.com. And you can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. So just go to iTunes, search for the DSLR Workshop, hit subscribe, and it's completely free. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day.